Have you ever been called worthless by the person you built an empire with? Well, buckle up, because what happened at the Sinclair Fashion Gala will make your jaw drop. This is the story of Eleanor Sinclair, a 72-year-old grandmother who walked into her husband's glamorous fashion show as the wallet and walked out as the woman who destroyed his entire world in less than 5 minutes. And trust me, the 38 missed calls that followed were just the beginning of his nightmare. Before we dive into this absolutely wild story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this one. These real-life revenge tales don't come around every day, and you definitely don't want to miss what happens next. Also, I'm curious, where are you watching this from? Are you Team Eleanor, or do you think she went too far? Drop a comment below and let me know what country or city you're tuning in from. I love hearing from you all. Now, let's get into this incredible story. Eleanor Sinclair had always been the kind of woman who moved through life with quiet grace. At 72, she still maintained the elegant posture of someone who had spent decades carrying herself with dignity. Her silver hair was always perfectly styled, her clothes understated but expensive, and her demeanor calm and collected. She wasn't the type to make scenes or demand attention. She had never been that woman. But on the night of March 15th, everything changed. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier. It was printed on heavy cardstock with gold embossing that caught the light at every angle. You are cordially invited to the launch of Sinclair Couture's spring collection, it read. At the bottom, in smaller print, black tie required. There was no personal note from her husband, Richard. No, I hope you can make it, or I'd love for you to be there. Just the formal invitation, probably sent by his assistant, the same way hundreds of others had been distributed to fashion editors, celebrities, and industry insiders. Eleanor had held that invitation in her hands for a long time, sitting in the conservatory of their sprawling estate in the Connecticut countryside. The estate that she had helped purchase 47 years ago with money from her family's textile business. The same textile business that had provided the initial capital for Richard's first fashion venture when he was just a young designer with big dreams and empty pockets. She remembered those early days with a mixture of nostalgia and something darker now. Richard had been 28, full of passion and creativity, sketching designs on any scrap of paper he could find. Eleanor had been 25, fresh out of business school, already helping manage her father's textile empire. When they met at a fabric expo in New York City, it had felt like fate. He had the vision, she had the business acumen and the resources. Together, they could build something extraordinary. And they had. Oh, how they had. For the first 20 years. They were partners in every sense of the word. Eleanor handled all the business operations, the contracts, the trademark registrations, the banking relationships, the supply chain management. She had insisted on keeping the business accounts in her name, a decision her father had advised her to make. Always protect yourself, he had told her, even in love, especially in business. At the time, Richard hadn't objected. He was too busy creating, designing, building his reputation. He trusted her completely with the business side of things. The trademark for Sinclair Couture was registered in Eleanor's name. She had been the one to file the paperwork, to work with the attorneys, to build the legal framework that protected their brand. Richard had been grateful then. He used to kiss her forehead and say, "You're the foundation of everything, Ellie. I'm just the pretty face." But somewhere along the way, things shifted. It started small. Richard began traveling more frequently. Paris, Milan, New York, Los Angeles. Fashion weeks and photo shoots, and meetings with celebrities. His Instagram following grew into the millions. Magazine covers featured his face alongside his designs. He was invited to exclusive parties, where Eleanor, with her preference for quiet evenings and classical music, didn't quite fit in. "You wouldn't enjoy it anyway," he'd say, when she asked about accompanying him. "It's all very superficial. Lots of young people and noise. You'd be bored." Eleanor had accepted this explanation, at first. She had never craved the spotlight. She was content managing the business from their Connecticut home, ensuring that every contract was solid, every shipment was on time, every financial decision was sound. She was the engine that kept Sinclair Couture running, while Richard was the face that sold it to the world. But over the past 3 years, the distance between them had grown into a chasm. Richard's trips became longer. His phone calls home became shorter. When he was home, which was increasingly rare, he seemed irritated by her presence. The small intimacies of their marriage, morning coffee together, evening walks through their gardens, long conversations about everything and nothing, had disappeared entirely. Their children had noticed too. Catherine, their 45-year-old daughter, who lived in Boston with her family, had mentioned it during their last phone call. "Mom, when's the last time Dad was home for more than 2 days?" "Is everything okay?" Eleanor had reassured her daughter that everything was fine, that Richard was just busy with the business. But late at night, lying alone in the king-size bed they used to share, Eleanor wondered if she had been lying to herself for years. The invitation to the spring collection launch felt like a test. Would he want her there? Would he introduce her to his fashionable friends? Or would she be an embarrassment, a reminder of his humble beginnings and the life he seemed desperate to leave behind? She decided she would go, not because she expected anything particular, but because after 47 years of marriage, she deserved to see what her husband had built with the foundation she had provided. Eleanor chose her outfit carefully for the event. She wore a midnight blue silk dress from their very first collection, one that Richard had designed specifically for her decades ago. It still fit perfectly, its timeless elegance a testament to Richard's early talent, before his designs became more avant-garde, and, in her opinion, sometimes ridiculous. She paired it with simple diamond earrings, a gift from her mother, and her wedding ring, the platinum band worn smooth from nearly 5 decades of wear. Her driver, James, who had been with their family for 15 years, drove her into Manhattan. The event was being held at the Apex, one of those ultra-modern venues in the meatpacking district with floor-to-ceiling windows and industrial chic exposed brick. As they approached, Eleanor could see the red carpet, the photographers, the beautiful young people streaming inside, wearing outfits that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Would you like me to wait nearby, Mrs. Sinclair?" James asked as he pulled up to the entrance. Eleanor considered this. Something in her gut told her this evening might not go as planned, but she couldn't quite articulate why. "Yes, James, please stay close. I may not be very long." She stepped out of the car, and immediately the atmosphere changed. There were no photographers rushing toward her. No one called her name or asked her to pose. In fact, several people looked at her with barely concealed confusion, as if wondering how this older woman in a vintage dress had managed to get past security. Eleanor walked through the entrance, showed her invitation to the young woman at the desk, who checked her name off with barely a glance, and entered the main gallery. The space was absolutely stunning. Eleanor had to admit. Massive photographs of Richard's latest designs hung from the exposed brick walls, each model more ethereal and beautiful than the last. A lighting was dramatic, spotlights that created pools of brightness against shadowy corners, giving the whole venue an air of exclusive mystery. Servers in sleek black uniforms circulated with champagne flutes and tiny artistic appetizers that looked almost too beautiful to eat. Electronic music pulsed through hidden speakers, not so loud that conversation was impossible, but present enough to create energy and movement. And everywhere, there were beautiful people, models, influencers, fashion editors, celebrities Eleanor vaguely recognized from her granddaughter's Instagram obsessions. They air-kissed and posed, their laughter high and bright, their clothes cutting-edge and expensive. Eleanor felt suddenly very out of place in her vintage dress, even though objectively she knew it was probably worth more, and was certainly better made than half the outfits in this room. She spotted Richard almost immediately. He was holding court near the center of the gallery, surrounded by a group of stunning young women. He had aged well, she had to admit, though the thought came with a bitter edge now. At 75, he still had a full head of hair. Silver now, but thick and styled in that artfully messy way that probably took his stylist an hour to perfect. He wore a slim-cut black suit with a black turtleneck underneath, the uniform of the artistic elite. He looked successful, powerful, vibrant. He looked nothing like the man who used to wake up early to bring her coffee in bed, who used to sketch her portrait while she read, who used to tell her she was his muse and his anchor. Eleanor took the champagne flute from a passing server, more to have something to do with her hands than because she wanted it, and began moving through the crowd. She wasn't sure what her plan was. Find Richard, say hello, congratulate him on the collection. It seemed absurd now that she thought about it. This wasn't her world, and it was becoming increasingly clear that Richard had built this world specifically without her in it. As she moved through the gallery, she began to notice something. People were staring at her, but not with admiration or curiosity. There were whispers, barely concealed smirks, and several times she caught groups of young women looking at her, and then at Richard, and then back at her again. Their expressions, a mixture of pity and amusement. She was near one of the dramatic photographs, a model in an impossible pose, wearing what appeared to be a dress made entirely of metallic chains. When she heard it, "Oh my God, is that her?" The voice came from behind her, deliberately loud enough to be heard. Eleanor didn't turn around, but she felt her spine stiffen. "That's her," another voice confirmed, this one dripping with mean girl satisfaction. "That's the wife." "I can't believe she actually showed up. Richard said she probably wouldn't come. He said she never leaves Connecticut anymore, just sits in that old house counting her money." Laughter, sharp and cruel. "Well, I guess the wallet has arrived. Do you think she knows?" "Knows what, about Scarlett? Oh, honey, everyone knows. I mean, look at him. Of course he upgraded. He's Richard Sinclair. He can have anyone." Eleanor's hand tightened around her champagne flute. She still didn't turn around, but her mind was racing. Scarlett. She didn't know anyone named Scarlett. But the way these women said the name, with such familiarity and knowing tone, made the implication crystal clear. "The wallet is here," one of them repeated, and the laughter got louder. Eleanor finally turned. The three young women, all impossibly tall, impossibly thin, with the kind of striking features that photographed beautifully, immediately pretended to be fascinated by the photograph on the wall. But their eyes kept sliding toward her, glittering with malicious amusement. For a moment, Eleanor considered confronting them, asking them to explain exactly what they meant, demanding they show her the respect that 47 years of marriage and 72 years of living with dignity deserved. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was breeding. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Or perhaps it was the sudden, crushing realization that confronting these girls would change nothing. They were symptoms, not the disease. Instead, she simply looked at them, really looked at them, until their smug expressions faltered slightly. Then she turned and continued through the gallery, her posture still perfect, her face composed. She needed to find Richard. She located him near the back of the gallery now, standing with a small group that included two men she recognized from fashion magazines, and a stunning young woman with platinum blonde hair and legs that seemed to go on forever. The woman had her hand on Richard's arm, a gesture of easy intimacy that made Eleanor's stomach clench. As Eleanor approached, Richard noticed her. For just a fraction of a second, she saw something flash across his face. Surprise, irritation, maybe even a hint of fear. But it was gone so quickly, she might have imagined it, replaced by a smooth, public smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Eleanor," he said, and his tone was pleasant, but distant, the way you might greet an acquaintance you hadn't expected to see. "You came." "You sent an invitation," she replied, her voice calm. "I'm still your wife." "Of course I came." The platinum blonde's eyes widened slightly, and she glanced between Eleanor and Richard with obvious interest. The two fashion editors suddenly became very interested in their drinks. "Yes, well," Richard said, his jaw tightening. "I'm glad you could make it. As you can see, we're quite busy tonight. Perhaps we can catch up later." "I'd like to speak with you," Eleanor interrupted quietly. "Privately, just for a moment." Richard's smile became more strained. The platinum blonde, Scarlet, Eleanor's mind supplied, squeezed his arm gently. "I'll be right back, darling," she said, her voice sweet and young. She kissed Richard's cheek and glided away, her hips swaying in a dress that barely qualified as clothing. "Darling?" She had called him darling, in front of his wife. "Richard," one of the fashion editors said smoothly, clearly sensing the tension. "We'll catch up with you in a bit. Brilliant collection, by the way." "Absolutely brilliant." They disappeared into the crowd, leaving Eleanor and Richard standing together in a small bubble of space, despite the packed gallery. "What are you doing here, Eleanor?" Richard asked, and now the pleasant veneer was gone. His voice was low and hard. "What am I doing here?" Eleanor repeated, genuinely taken aback by the question. "I'm your wife. You're launching a collection. Where else would I be? You don't belong here." Richard said bluntly. "Look around. Does this seem like your kind of event? You should be at home, Eleanor. This is embarrassing." The words hit her like a physical blow. Embarrassing. She was an embarrassment to him. "I see," she said quietly. Her mind felt strangely clear now, like she was watching this conversation from a distance. "And who does belong here, Richard? That girl? Scarlet?" His face flushed. "Don't start this here." "I'm not starting anything. I'm simply trying to understand when my marriage ended and no one bothered to tell me." Richard glanced around nervously, clearly concerned about being overheard. He took Eleanor's elbow, not gently, and steered her toward a quieter corner of the gallery, behind a tall display panel that blocked them from most of the crowd. "Listen," he said, his voice tight. "I didn't want to do this tonight, but since you forced the issue, we might as well be honest. He gestured vaguely between them. "This hasn't been working for a long time. You know it, I know it. We've been living separate lives for years. We've been living separate lives because you chose to travel constantly and build a social circle I wasn't invited to join," Eleanor said, her voice still measured, but with an edge now. "Don't rewrite history, Richard." "I'm not rewriting anything. The truth is, we've grown apart. I've changed. My life has changed." "And you," he looked at her with something like pity now, which was somehow worse than the irritation. "You're still the same person you were 40 years ago. You're content to sit in Connecticut, managing spreadsheets and having tea with your book club friends. That's not the life I want anymore." "The life you want," Eleanor repeated. "The life you've built with my family's money, with my business infrastructure, with my trademark registrations and my banking relationships. Richard's eyes flashed. I built this brand. Me. My talent. My vision. My designs. You helped in the early days, sure, but let's not pretend you're the reason for my success. The world knows Richard Sinclair because of my work, not because of your paperwork. Eleanor felt something inside her shift. It was like watching a carefully constructed building reveal its foundation was rotten. All these years. She had believed they were partners. She had taken pride in being the infrastructure that allowed his creativity to flourish. But in his mind, she had been nothing more than a temporary inconvenience, a stepping stone to be discarded once he no longer needed her. I see, Eleanor said again, and she was surprised by how steady her voice remained. So Ivy's useful when you needed capital and business expertise. But now that you're famous, I'm just an embarrassment. An old woman who doesn't fit into your glamorous new world. Richard had the decency to look uncomfortable for a moment, but he pushed through it. I'm not trying to be cruel, Eleanor. I'm trying to be honest. We're both too old to keep pretending. I want a divorce. I want to move on with my life, while I still have time to enjoy it. With Scarlett. Yes, he said, lifting his chin defiantly. With Scarlett. She understands me. She understands this world. She's vibrant and exciting, and she makes me feel alive again. Something you haven't done in years. Eleanor absorbed this information, feeling each word like a small cut. But underneath the hurt, something else was building. Something cold and clear and absolutely certain. Well, she said quietly. Thank you for your honesty. After 47 years, I suppose I deserved at least that much. Richard seemed relieved that she wasn't making a scene. He actually smiled slightly, the way you might smile at a child who is finally being reasonable. I'm glad you understand. This doesn't have to be difficult. We can handle this discreetly. Divide things fairly. Richard, a voice called from nearby. They both turned to see a young man in thick-framed glasses and an expensive suit approaching. He carried a manila folder and had the eager, efficient look of a high-powered assistant. Sorry to interrupt, but we need you for the photographer from Vogue in 5 minutes. Perfect timing, Richard said. He turned back to Eleanor and held out his hand to the assistant, who looked confused for a moment before understanding dawned on his face. The assistant handed Richard the manila folder. Richard opened it and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Eleanor could see official-looking headers, dense paragraphs of legal text, signature lines marked with bright yellow tabs. What is this? She asked, though she already knew. Divorce papers, Richard said simply. My attorney drew them up last week. I was going to have them delivered to you next month, but since you're here, we might as well handle this now. He pulled out a pen from his inside jacket pocket and held it out to her. Just sign where the tabs are. It's all very straightforward. You get the Connecticut house, obviously. I get the business and all associated assets. There's a settlement amount outlined. It's generous, Eleanor. More than generous. Eleanor stared at the papers, then at the pen, then at her husband's face. He looked impatient now, eager to get this unpleasant task completed so he could return to his party, to his beautiful people, to his new life. You want me to sign divorce papers, Eleanor said slowly, at your fashion show, surrounded by hundreds of people, while your girlfriend waits in the next room. I want us both to move forward. Richard corrected. And yes, I'd like to get this process started tonight. Sign the papers, Eleanor. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm famous now. I don't need a nobody wife dragging me down anymore. This is the best thing for both of us. A nobody wife. Those 3 words hung in the air between them, and Eleanor felt something inside her crack completely. Not her heart. That had been breaking slowly for years. No, This was something else. This was the final thread of respect, of partnership, of shared history, simply severing. She looked at the papers in Richard's hand. 47 years of marriage, reduced to legal documents. A lifetime of partnership, of building something together, dismissed as easily as you might fire an unsatisfactory employee. "I see," Eleanor said, for the third time that evening. Her voice was still calm, still measured. She reached out and took the papers from Richard's hand. Relief flooded his face. "Good. That's good, Eleanor. You're being very reasonable about this. Just sign the tabs and—" Eleanor tucked the papers under her arm without looking at them. "I'll have my attorney review these." Richard's face darkened. "Eleanor, don't play games. Just sign them now and—" "I said I'll have my attorney review them," Eleanor repeated, her voice gaining an edge now. "Surely, after 47 years of marriage, you can give me a few days to have legal representation examine divorce documents before I sign them." "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Richard snapped, his composure finally cracking. "Everything has to be complicated with you. Everything has to be a process, just for once. Can't you just do something without overthinking it?" Eleanor looked at her husband, really looked at him, and realized with crystal clarity that she didn't know this man at all. Or perhaps she did know him, and had simply been refusing to see who he really was for far too long. "Goodbye, Richard," she said quietly. She turned and walked away before he could respond. She moved through the gallery with her head high, ignoring the whispers and stares. She heard the models giggling again as she passed. "The wallet is leaving," but their words felt distant now, unimportant. She found the exit and stepped out into the cool March evening. James had the car waiting at the curb. Bless him. He took one look at her face and opened the door without a word. "Home, Mrs. Sinclair?" he asked gently once they were both inside. Eleanor sat in the back seat, the manila folder on her lap, and felt the weight of the evening settle over her. Home. The Connecticut estate that Richard had so easily assigned to her in his generous settlement. As if it were just a piece of real estate, and not the place where they had raised their children, celebrated anniversaries, built a life. "Not yet, James," she said. "First, I need to make a phone call." She pulled out her cell phone, a recent iPhone that her granddaughter had helped her set up. Eleanor wasn't as technologically helpless as Richard liked to believe. She had kept up with the business world, had stayed sharp and informed. She just hadn't been interested in Instagram followers and TikTok dances. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for, Walter Pemberton. Walter had been her father's attorney and had transitioned to being Eleanor's personal attorney when her father passed. He was 80 years old now, but still sharp as a tack, and he handled all of Eleanor's personal assets, which were considerable. It was 9:30 on a Friday night, but Walter had told her repeatedly that she could call him anytime. He answered on the third ring. "Eleanor." His warm, gravelly voice came through. "This is a surprise. Is everything all right?" "Walter," Eleanor said, and was pleased that her voice remained steady. "I need you to do something for me. Several things, actually, and I need them done tonight." There was a pause, and she could almost hear Walter sitting up straighter, his attorney instincts kicking in. "What's happened?" "Richard has asked me for a divorce. He handed me papers tonight at his fashion show and called me a nobody who's dragging him down. He wants to move on with his new girlfriend and his glamorous life." "That son of a—" Walter caught himself. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. That's unconscionable. What do you need?" Eleanor felt a strange calm settling over her. She had spent 47 years being reasonable, being accommodating, being the supportive foundation for Richard's dreams. She had let him take credit, let him shine, let him build his public persona, while she worked quietly in the background. She had done all of this because she loved him and because she believed they were partners. But if Richard wanted to treat their marriage like a business arrangement that no longer suited him, then she would respond in kind. I need you to call Preston First Bank and freeze all business accounts associated with Sinclair Couture. All of them. The operating accounts, the payroll accounts, the merchant accounts, everything. Eleanor, Walter's voice was cautious now. Are you certain that's a significant step? Those accounts are in my name, correct? From when we first established the business? Yes, you're the primary account holder on all of them. Richard has signing authority, but you're the owner. Then freeze them, effective immediately. She heard Walter typing on his computer. Consider it done. What else? The trademark for Sinclair Couture. It's registered in my name. Yes. Yes, you filed the original registration, and all renewals have been maintained under your ownership. I want it revoked. I want to begin the process of rescinding Richard's license to use the trademark. There was a longer pause this time. Eleanor, that will effectively shut down his entire business. He won't be able to use the Sinclair Couture name for anything. Production, sales, marketing, nothing. Is that really what you want? Eleanor thought about Richard's face when he called her a nobody. She thought about the models giggling and calling her the wallet. She thought about Scarlett's hand on his arm and the way she had called him darling. She thought about 47 years of partnership being dismissed as if she had been nothing more than temporary assistance. Yes, she said firmly. That's exactly what I want. All right, Walter said, and she could hear the mix of concern and grim satisfaction in his voice. I'll start the paperwork tonight. The trademark revocation will take a few days to process formally, but I can send a cease and desist letter immediately notifying him that his license to use the trademark is being terminated. That will have immediate legal effect. Perfect, Eleanor said. And Walter, I want you to contact Harrison Mitchell at the textile company. Harrison was the current CEO of her family's textile business, which Eleanor still owned a controlling share of. Richard's current production contracts are with us, correct? Yes, through the family business. He gets preferential pricing because of your relationship. Cancel those contracts, effective immediately. Eleanor, Walter said gently, I understand you're angry, and you have every right to be. But are you sure you want to do all of this tonight? Perhaps you should take some time to think. Walter, Eleanor interrupted, her voice still calm, but with steel underneath. I have spent 47 years thinking. I have spent 47 years being patient, being understanding, being supportive. I built the legal and financial infrastructure that made Sinclair Couture possible. I provided the capital. I registered the trademark. I negotiated the contracts. I managed the accounts. Richard designed beautiful clothes, yes, but I built the business. And if he thinks he can simply discard me and keep everything I created, he is very much mistaken. There was a moment of silence, and then Walter chuckled, a dry, appreciative sound. Your father would be proud. He always said you had more business sense than anyone he'd ever met. All right, Eleanor. Consider it all done. I'll make the calls tonight. The bank freeze will be in effect within the hour. The cease and desist will be drafted and sent electronically immediately. The textile contracts will be terminated by morning. Thank you, Walter. One more thing, Walter added. Those divorce papers he gave you, don't sign anything. Bring them to my office on Monday morning. We'll go through them with a fine-tooth comb, and then we'll prepare our own response. If Richard wants a divorce, he can have one, but it will be on your terms, not his. Eleanor smiled for the first time that evening. I wouldn't dream of signing them without your review. They said their goodbyes, and Eleanor ended the call. She sat back in the car seat, feeling the adrenaline beginning to course through her system. James had been driving slowly through Manhattan, waiting for her to give him a final destination. But now she spoke up. "You can take me home now, James." "Very good, Mrs. Sinclair," he replied, and she saw him glance at her in the rearview mirror with something that might have been approval. The drive from Manhattan to their Connecticut estate normally took about 90 minutes, depending on traffic. At this time of night, it would probably be closer to 75 minutes. Eleanor spent the time looking out the window at the passing lights, feeling remarkably calm. She wasn't a vindictive person by nature. She had never been the type to seek revenge or to hurt others, even when they hurt her. But this wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. This was about recognizing her own value after decades of having it diminished. Richard had wanted to reduce their marriage to a transaction. She was useful until she wasn't. And now she could be discarded. Well, if it was a transaction, she was entitled to withdraw her assets from the deal. They were about 45 minutes into the drive when Eleanor's phone began to ring. She looked at the screen. Richard. She declined the call. It rang again immediately. Richard again. She declined it again. Then the texts started coming in. "Eleanor, call me back immediately. This is serious. Call me now. What did you do? Elian, answer your phone." She watched the messages come in, one after another, and felt nothing but that same cold clarity. She set her phone to silent and placed it face down on the seat beside her. Over the next 10 minutes, her phone lit up repeatedly. She didn't need to look at it to know it was Richard, calling again and again. The light show from her phone screen was almost rhythmic in the dark car. By the time they pulled up to the gate of their Connecticut estate, her phone had received 38 missed calls. 38 times Richard had tried to reach her in less than 15 minutes. Eleanor wondered if he had ever called her that many times in the past 5 years combined. James pulled up to the front entrance of the house, a beautiful Georgian-style mansion that Eleanor's family had helped them purchase in 1978. She had always loved this house. The gardens, the conservatory, the library, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Richard had stopped coming here years ago, preferring to stay at his Manhattan penthouse apartment, another asset that would need to be addressed in the divorce proceedings. "Will you need anything else this evening, Mrs. Sinclair?" James asked. "No, thank you, James. You've been wonderful. Go home to your family." "If you're certain, ma'am, I'll be available if you need me." Eleanor let herself into the house. It was quiet. Her housekeeper, Martha, had gone home hours ago. The silence was welcome after the chaos and noise of the fashion show. She made her way to the library, poured herself a glass of her father's favorite scotch, a bottle she had been saving for a special occasion, and this certainly qualified, and settled into her favorite armchair. Her phone was still buzzing constantly. She finally picked it up and looked at the screen. 47 missed calls now. Dozens of text messages, and not just from Richard. There were messages from numbers she didn't recognize, presumably people from the fashion show, who had somehow gotten her contact information. One message was from a number with a Manhattan area code. "Mrs. Sinclair, this is Vivian Chen, Richard's business manager. Please call me immediately. There's been a terrible mistake with the business accounts." Eleanor almost laughed. A terrible mistake. That's what they were calling it. Another message, this one from Richard. "You're destroying everything we built. How can you be so cruel?" Everything we built. That was rich. Eleanor sipped her scotch and considered her options. She could answer the phone, could engage with Richard's panic and anger, or she could let him stew. Let him fully understand what it felt like to have your entire world yanked out from under you without warning. She chose the latter. Instead, she called her daughter, Catherine. It was nearly midnight, but this was important. Catherine answered on the second ring, sounding alert. "Mom, is everything okay? It's late." "Hello, darling," Eleanor said, and was pleased that her voice sounded normal, even warm. "I'm sorry to call so late. I have some news." "What's wrong? Is it Dad?" "In a manner of speaking, your father asked me for a divorce tonight. He handed me papers at his fashion show and told me he doesn't need a nobody wife anymore. He's been having an affair with a young woman named Scarlett." There was a shocked silence on the other end of the line, and then Catherine's voice came through, sharp with fury. "He did what?" Eleanor explained the evening's events, leaving out no details. The model's comments, Richard's cruel dismissal, the way he had treated their 47-year marriage as if it were nothing more than an inconvenient business arrangement. "That absolute bastard," Catherine hissed. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm getting in the car right now. I'll be there in 2 hours." "That's not necessary, sweetheart. I'm fine." "You're not fine. Your husband just publicly humiliated you and asked for a divorce. You shouldn't be alone." "Catherine," Eleanor said gently, "I'm truly all right. Better than all right, actually. I've taken steps." "What kind of steps?" Eleanor explained what she had done: the frozen accounts, the trademark revocation, the cancelled contracts. As she spoke, she heard Catherine's breathing change, and then her daughter began to laugh. "Oh my God," Catherine said, still laughing. "Oh my God, Mom. You froze everything? The accounts, the trademark, all of it?" "All of it." "That's," Catherine paused, searching for words. "That's the most badass thing I've ever heard. Dad must be losing his mind. He's called 47 times in the last hour. Good, let him panic. Let him realize exactly what he's throwing away." Catherine's voice turned serious. "Mom, I know this must be incredibly painful. I know you loved him, love him. Are you really okay?" Eleanor considered the question. Was she okay? Her husband of 47 years had betrayed her, humiliated her, and discarded her. By all rights, she should be devastated. But sitting in her library, in the house she loved, with a glass of excellent scotch, and the satisfaction of knowing that Richard was finally understanding the consequences of his actions, Eleanor realized she felt something unexpected. She felt free. "You know what, darling?" Eleanor said. "I actually think I am okay. I think I've been not okay for a very long time, and I'm just now realizing it." Catherine was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "I'm proud of you. Mom, I know that's a weird thing to say given the circumstances, but I am. You've always been so strong, but you've spent your whole life making sure Dad could shine. Maybe it's time for you to shine instead." They talked for another 20 minutes, with Catherine insisting she would drive up the next day, regardless of Eleanor's protests. Finally, Eleanor convinced her daughter to get some sleep, promising to call if she needed anything. After hanging up, Eleanor sat in the quiet library for a long time. Her phone continued to buzz periodically. Richard hadn't given up, though the calls were less frequent now. She imagined him at the fashion show, trying to maintain his composure while his entire business infrastructure collapsed around him, trying to explain to Scarlett and his fashionable friends why his accounts weren't working, why his business manager was frantically making phone calls, why his triumphant evening was turning into a disaster. Around 1 a.m, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered it. Eleanor. It was Richard's voice, but not the Richard from earlier that evening. This Richard sounded desperate, exhausted. "Please, we need to talk." "I don't believe we have anything to discuss," Eleanor said calmly. "You froze the accounts?" "All of them. Do you understand what that means? I have orders to fulfill, payroll to process, suppliers waiting for payment. You're destroying the business. I'm destroying the business, Eleanor repeated, her voice still eerily calm. Richard, I built the business. Those accounts are in my name. That trademark is registered to me. The textile contracts are through my family's company. I didn't destroy anything. I simply withdrew my support from a venture that, as you so eloquently put it, no longer needs a nobody wife. Eleanor, I was angry. I didn't mean— Yes, you did. Eleanor interrupted. You meant every word. You wanted me to feel small and insignificant. You wanted me to know that you've outgrown me, that I'm an embarrassment to your new glamorous life. Well, congratulations, Richard. You've made your feelings abundantly clear. Please, and now Richard's voice cracked. I know I hurt you. I know I was cruel. But you can't do this. There are hundreds of employees depending on this business. There are contracts, commitments. If you shut everything down, all those people lose their jobs. Then perhaps you should have thought of that before you decided to blow up our marriage at a fashion show, Eleanor said. Those employees worked for a company built on my foundation. If that foundation is being withdrawn, that's your problem to solve, not mine. My lawyers are going to fight this, Richard said, his voice hardening. You can't just steal my business. Eleanor laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Your business? Richard, let me be very clear about something. Sinclair Couture exists because I registered the trademark. It operates because I set up the banking infrastructure. It produces clothing because I negotiated favorable contracts with my family's textile company. You designed beautiful clothes, but I built the business. And you just spent the evening making it very clear that you believe my contributions were meaningless. So now you get to run your business without the nobody wife. Good luck with that. Eleanor, I'm going to bed now, Richard. I suggest you call your lawyer. Though I should warn you, after midnight rates are quite expensive, and without access to your business accounts, I'm not sure how you'll pay them. She hung up before he could respond. Her phone immediately began ringing again. She powered it off completely. The next morning, Eleanor woke at her usual time, 6:30. She had slept surprisingly well, better than she had in years, actually. She made herself coffee, took a long walk through her gardens, which were just beginning to show signs of spring, and then sat down in her conservatory with her laptop. She powered her phone back on and was unsurprised to see 117 missed calls and countless text messages. She ignored all of them and instead opened her email. Walter had been busy. There were several emails from him with attachments. The cease and desist letter regarding the trademark, confirmation that all business accounts had been frozen, documentation that the textile contracts had been terminated. Everything was official, legal, and absolutely binding. There was also an email from Harrison at the textile company. Eleanor, Walter briefed me on the situation. I'm so sorry about what Richard did. The contracts have been canceled, as requested. Also wanted you to know that Richard's team has already called us 3 times this morning, trying to negotiate new terms. I told them we are not interested in doing business with Sinclair Couture moving forward. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Let me know if there's anything else I can do to support you. Eleanor smiled. Her father had always said that loyalty was the most valuable currency in business. Harrison understood that. Around 10 o'clock, there was a knock on her front door. Eleanor opened it to find a young man in a suit holding a briefcase, looking nervous. Mrs. Sinclair, I'm David Morrison, an attorney with Hartwell and Associates. I represent your husband, Richard Sinclair. May I come in? Eleanor considered this. I have an attorney, Mr. Morrison, any communication should go through him. I understand, ma'am, but Mr. Sinclair asked me to deliver this to you personally. He opened his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. He wanted me to express his sincere apologies for last night and to assure you that he deeply regrets his words and actions. How thoughtful, Eleanor said dryly. She took the envelope. Will that be all? He was hoping you might be willing to discuss the business accounts. There are time-sensitive matters that need to be addressed. Payroll, supplier payments, that sort of thing. Morrison, I'm sure you're aware that those accounts are in my name and under my control. If Richard wishes to discuss financial matters, he can do so through proper legal channels. In the meantime, I suggest he explore alternative banking arrangements. Mrs. Sinclair, with all due respect, freezing those accounts affects hundreds of employees who have done nothing wrong. Surely you don't want to punish innocent people. Eleanor felt a flash of anger. Mr. Morrison, I spent 47 years ensuring those employees had jobs. I managed the business operations that kept Sinclair Couture profitable and stable. If those employees are now in jeopardy, it's because Richard decided to implode our marriage in the most public and humiliating way possible. Perhaps you should ask him why he didn't consider the consequences of his actions before he called his wife of nearly 5 decades a nobody. The young attorney had the grace to look uncomfortable. I understand you're upset. I'm not upset, Mr. Morrison. I'm done. There's a difference. Good day. She closed the door firmly and returned to her conservatory. She opened the envelope the attorney had delivered. Inside was a handwritten letter from Richard. Eleanor, I know I hurt you terribly. I was caught up in the moment, in the excitement of the show, and I said things that were cruel and untrue. You're not a nobody. You've never been a nobody. You built so much of what Sinclair Couture is, and I was wrong to dismiss that. Please, can we talk? Can we find a way to fix this? I don't want to lose you, and I don't want to lose everything we've built together. Please call me. Richard. Eleanor read the letter twice, looking for sincerity. What she found instead was desperation. This wasn't a man who had realized he loved his wife. This was a man who had realized he needed his wife's business infrastructure. She put the letter aside and opened her laptop again. Over the next few hours, she made several calls and sent numerous emails. By early afternoon, she had accomplished several things. First, she had contacted 3 of the major fashion publications that had covered Richard's launch and provided them with a statement. She kept it simple and dignified. After 47 years of marriage, my husband, Richard Sinclair, requested a divorce last night at his fashion show. While I'm saddened by this development, I respect his decision and wish him well. I will be stepping back from my role in the business operations of Sinclair Couture, effective immediately. I'm looking forward to focusing on my family and personal interests. The statement was perfect. It made her look gracious and dignified, while subtly making it clear that she had been involved in business operations, something Richard had always downplayed in public. It also made it clear that her departure from the business was a direct result of the divorce, which would make people ask questions. Second, she had called her son, James Jr., who worked in finance in San Francisco. He had been appropriately outraged on her behalf and had immediately offered to fly home. Eleanor had convinced him to wait, but had asked him to recommend a good financial advisor. She had significant personal assets separate from the business, and if she was going to be single again, she wanted to ensure everything was properly managed and protected. Third, she had scheduled a meeting with Walter for Monday morning to go over the divorce papers and begin preparing their response. By the time Catherine arrived at 3 that afternoon, Eleanor had the situation well in hand. Her daughters swept into the house and immediately pulled Eleanor into a fierce hug. "Mom, how are you really?" "I'm really okay," Eleanor said, and meant it. "Come on, I'll make us tea and tell you everything." They spent the afternoon and evening talking, making plans, and occasionally checking social media, where the story was beginning to spread. Fashion bloggers and gossip sites had picked up on Eleanor's statement and were speculating about what had happened. Several people who had been at the fashion show had anonymously shared details about Richard's behavior, about Scarlett, about the atmosphere of the event. The narrative that was emerging was not favorable to Richard. He was being painted as the aging designer who had dumped his longtime wife for a younger model, a tired, cliched story that made him look vain and cruel. Eleanor's dignified statement, in contrast, made her look like the classy, wronged woman who had built his empire. By Sunday evening, the story had exploded. Major entertainment and fashion news outlets were covering it. Someone had leaked information about the frozen accounts and the trademark dispute, which added another layer to the narrative. Richard Sinclair hadn't just left his wife. He had left the woman who owned the infrastructure of his entire business. Eleanor's phone rang constantly with requests for interviews. She declined them all, which only made the media more interested. Mystery and dignity, it turned out, were far more compelling than angry outbursts. On Monday morning, Eleanor dressed in a sharp navy suit, one from their earliest collections, and met with Walter at his office. They spent 3 hours going over the divorce papers Richard had presented. "This is insulting," Walter said, shaking his head as he read through the settlement terms. "He's offering you the Connecticut house and a one-time payment of $2 million. Meanwhile, he keeps the business, which is valued at over $50 million. The Manhattan penthouse, all intellectual property rights, and his investment accounts. He thinks I don't understand business," Eleanor said. "He thinks I'll just accept whatever he offers because I'm too old and too tired to fight." "Well, he's in for a surprise," Walter said grimly. "Here's what we're going to do." They spent the next hour outlining Eleanor's response. She would accept the divorce. She had no interest in staying married to Richard now. But the financial settlement would be very different from what Richard had proposed. Eleanor would retain ownership of the Sinclair Couture trademark. Richard could license it from her at market rates, or he could rebrand entirely. His choice. She would retain ownership and control of all business accounts. The Connecticut estate would remain hers. She would receive 50% of the value of the Manhattan penthouse. And she would receive 50% of Richard's investment and retirement accounts, which was only fair given that much of that money had come from the business profits she had helped generate. "He's going to fight this," Walter warned. "Let him," Eleanor said. "I have all the documentation showing my role in building the business. I have the trademark registration, the account records, everything. If he wants to go to court and have a judge examine exactly who contributed what to Sinclair Couture, I'm more than happy to do that. Something tells me Richard won't want that level of scrutiny." Walter smiled. "You know, your father used to say, you were sharper than anyone he knew in business. I'm seeing exactly what he meant." Over the next several weeks, the divorce proceedings moved forward. Richard's attorneys made aggressive threats and demands, but Eleanor's position was legally sound and backed by extensive documentation. More importantly, Richard's business was hemorrhaging. Without access to his accounts, without the trademark rights, and without his textile contracts, Sinclair Couture was effectively paralyzed. He tried to get emergency court orders to restore his account access, but the judge ruled that since the accounts were legally in Eleanor's name, Richard would need to establish his ownership claim through the divorce proceedings which would take time. He tried to set up new accounts and continue business operations under the Sinclair Couture name. But Eleanor's cease and desist letters and the threat of immediate litigation stopped those efforts cold. He tried to negotiate new textile contracts with other suppliers, but word had spread in the industry about how he had treated Eleanor. Most companies either refused to work with him or offered terms so unfavorable that he couldn't accept them. 6 weeks after that disastrous fashion show, Richard's attorney called Walter with a proposal. Richard would accept Eleanor's settlement terms if she would agree to license the trademark back to him at favorable rates and restore his account access. Eleanor considered this carefully. She could push for more. She could refuse the trademark license entirely and effectively end Richard's career. But that wasn't who she was. She had never wanted to destroy him. She had only wanted him to recognize her value and treat her with respect. Tell them I'll license the trademark at standard market rates, not favorable, but not punitive either. Eleanor said, I'll help him set up new business accounts that he controls, and I'll transfer operational funds so he can resume business. But I want the full settlement I outlined, and I want a public apology. A public apology? Walter asked, surprised. He humiliated me publicly, Eleanor said. He gets to apologize publicly. 2 days later, Richard Sinclair posted a statement on his Instagram account, which had 3 million followers. I owe a public apology to my soon-to-be ex-wife, Eleanor. I treated her with disrespect and cruelty, and I failed to acknowledge the enormous contributions she made to building Sinclair Couture. Eleanor was never just a silent partner or a financial backer. She was the business mind, the strategic planner, and the foundation that made everything possible. I let ego and vanity cloud my judgment, and I hurt someone who spent nearly 50 years supporting me and my dreams. I'm deeply sorry, Eleanor. You deserve so much better than what I gave you. The post went viral. Comments poured in, most supporting Eleanor and criticizing Richard. Several fashion industry figures chimed in with stories about Eleanor's business acumen and her role in the company's success. Stories that had never been publicly shared before. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Eleanor bought everything she had asked for. Richard got his business back, though significantly diminished, and with new costs from licensing the trademark. His relationship with Scarlett had ended. Apparently a man who suddenly lost most of his wealth and business empire wasn't quite as attractive as she'd thought. 6 months after that terrible night at the fashion show, Eleanor was sitting in her conservatory when Catherine called. Mom, have you seen the news about Dad? No. What now? He's closing Sinclair Couture. Says he's retiring from fashion. Eleanor was genuinely surprised. Really? Yeah. He posted this whole thing about how the industry has changed, how he's not enjoying it anymore, how he wants to focus on other interests. But reading between the lines, I think the business just never recovered. Without you running things behind the scenes, he couldn't keep it all together. Eleanor thought about this. She felt a pang of sadness, not for Richard, but for what they'd built together, for what could have been if he had just valued their partnership. Well, she said finally, I hope he finds whatever he's looking for. What about you, Mom? What are you going to do now? Eleanor smiled. She had been thinking about this a lot lately. She was 72 years old, financially secure, free from a marriage that had become hollow, and for the first time in decades, she could choose what to do with her life without considering anyone else's needs or dreams. I think, Eleanor said slowly, I might start my own business. Something in textiles or fashion consulting. I have 50 years of experience and a lot of industry contacts. Why should all that knowledge go to waste? Catherine laughed with delight. That's perfect, Mom. You'd be amazing. And you know what? Eleanor thought she would be. She had spent half a century building someone else's dream. Maybe it was time to build her own. As she sat in her conservatory that evening, watching the sunset over her gardens, Eleanor reflected on that night at the fashion show, the night she'd been called a nobody, the night her 47-year marriage had ended, the night she'd been humiliated in front of hundreds of people. It was also the night she'd remembered exactly who she was. Not Richard Sinclair's wife. Not just the business mind behind a famous brand, but Eleanor Sinclair. Brilliant, capable, and worthy of respect. The wallet had indeed arrived that night, and when it left, it took everything with it.